Hello, everybody. This is Gary Matheny. Thank you for for joining me for today's edition or production of Liberty Observatory. Today's question is going to be, were my parents strict or relaxed? Well, I think my sister Irene probably most accurately characterized my parents and their child rearing. And I don't think that they developed any type of game plan. It was just a natural flow of who they were and their parenting styles. And so I had two older sisters, Carol and Irene. Irene is 7 years older than me, and my sister Carol is deceased. And so the way Irene characterized my parents' discipline or relaxed style was that my father was very demanding and my mother had unconditional love. And so these two things were kind of like emanating from my parents and how they raise their children. But you can't have a strict adherence to either description, because I can't say that my dad was very demanding but unloving, nor can I say that my mom was unconditional love. She also had expectations and desires. And so basically, let's talk a little bit here about my dad to understand why he was so demanding. I say that my dad was born and spent his formative years, his younger years, in Northeast Arkansas in the Corning area. And I call it hardscrabble. He had a hardscrabble Arkansas upbringing. He was born in the early 1920s, so that made him part of the World War II depression. And it also means that he lived through the depression and basically, as a boy and teenager, and then the war started, and then we came to post-war America, 1945. So he's part of the World War II generation. Part of that generation had lived through the Depression as a child. And then it got further complicated because his dad died in the 1930s, around the mid-1930s. So here we are in the depth of depression in Arkansas, and his dad dies. Well, also, the Matheny's in Arkansas were basically on the lower rung. They never described themselves this way. There was a certain amount of pride and dignity otherwise. But they were, in essence, a sharecropping family. They didn't own a farm. And so my dad talked about picking cotton when he was a boy. He also talked about going over to Tennessee and picking strawberries. Now that sounds like a sharecropping family to me when you're traveling around and picking fruits and vegetables off of farmers' land in order to make a living. So when my dad died, I should say my grandfather died in the mid-1930s, to further illustrate the difficulties that the family had in the Corning area, is that they gathered enough money together to send my Aunt Orly via bus to St. Louis. And she got a job in St. Louis as a maid working for well-to-do families in the Central West End, which at the time was a wealthy section of St. Louis, and still very nice section. So she would work and then send money back to Arkansas. And then one by one, two by two, slowly but surely, the rest of the family came up to St. Louis via bus. And my dad's first job in St. Louis was probably a huge improvement over a cotton picker in Arkansas. He was a delivery boy for the Chase Park Plaza hotel in their drugstore. So he would take medication or drugs and deliver them to the Central West End, these wealthy households. And I assume that he was tipped, but it's a lot better environment than the cotton fields of Arkansas. And so this upbringing made my dad kind of a hardened man. He was, in many respects, a man's man. And I think that my early formative and young adult, my dad died in 1991 years, I think my dad was wholly unimpressed. In fact, I think even now, if he were alive, he would be unimpressed with me. He made certain remarks to me growing up that, Gary, you couldn't punch your way out of a paper bag. That means I was a softie. He also said, Gary, you wouldn't make a pimple on a real man's. So he was comparing me to the hardscrabble upbringing that he had, where my upbringing was working class St. Louis by the airport. My dad eventually became a printer. He provided for us very well. And I guess compared to him, I did have a soft early development. And that's what most parents want for their kids, to have a better childhood and adulthood than they had. And so my dad was one of these fellows that pulled himself up by his own bootstraps, and he expected everyone else to do the same. And I was not adequate. And so, there was demands. There were expectations from my dad, which were pretty strongly held. And so to juxtapose that, I'll talk about my mother. My mother was German. She was born Anna Virginia Frances Schmidt in St. Louis on the South Side, German community, around 1922. And I think that Delmar was the east and west road through St. Louis that separated North St. Louis and South St. Louis. In North St. Louis, you had the wild-eyed Scott Irishman, and you had the blacks. South of Delmar, you had the more established German community, also the Italian community. And so basically, I don't think my mom went north of Delmar in St. Louis until she was about in her late teens, which seems unfathomable now. But I've actually talked to her about this stuff. You just had lines of demarcation back then that separated neighborhoods, and you didn't go into somebody else's neighborhood. By chance you might, for some specific reason, but as a general proposition, the ethnic groups and the races stayed in essentially their own neighborhoods. And so my mom was raised German, but she was a good old mom. I got very few scoldings. My mom remembered me when I was in college, where I don't think my dad would have helped. But who knows? My mom sent me $80 a month to Springfield, Missouri, when I went to Southwest Missouri State, to help me get by down there. And so she thought about me. And even as a young adult, when I moved into my own apartment in St. Louis, and eventually bought a house in St. Louis. I did not marry until I was 36. Saturday mornings would roll around, and guess who would head over to mom and dad's, with the laundry. I'm almost ashamed to say that. No wonder my dad thought I was such a softie. I'd just head over to my parents' house on Saturday morning and grab my laundry. My mom seemed happy to do it. It gave me an opportunity to visit my parents and spend some time with them, have lunch together, and then basically head back into my Saturday activities. Once I got married, that stopped. My wife would not have been real happy if I hauled my laundry off to my mom's every Saturday morning. Let that be a warning to all young men that allow their mother to baby them. It's a mixed blessing. It's nice, but on the other hand, you gotta grow up. You gotta grow up, and maybe that's what my dad was targeting within me, trying to make me a man. Well, my mom, I'm not sure I could do any wrong. I was the apple of her eye. I was her youngest. I was the only boy in the family. And I'm not saying she didn't love my sisters. I think over time, she had a much closer relationship with my older sister than me. And maybe that's to be expected. But anyhow, my mom loved me, cared for me, and my dad demanded from me. But what are some of the positives relating to this type of relationship? Well, it gave me an opportunity while I was growing up to see both models, the unconditional love model, that you're just loved, period. No matter who you are, no matter what you do, you are loved, versus the highly demanded, high expectation love that I got from my father. One that basically wanted me to be a man and wanted me to do grown-up things and do them well and assume my role in society as a real man for all purposes: work, education, family, community, every respect, be a man. And so in many respects, when it came right down to it in my family, I think that high expectations coupled with understanding worked to complement itself pretty well, because with the high expectations, which are not a bad thing, high expectations gives young people an opportunity to aspire, to be inspired, to do greater things, to pursue goals that are worthy and sometimes difficult, but still worthy. And then the understanding part of it means that they're with you, that no matter what happens, they're with you. You can rely upon them. And so I think my parents' way of raising us children was highly complimentary. Well, as far as the negative side of the coin, it seemed like I had a huge amount of respect for my father, huge amount of respect. And maybe intuitively, this may be because I'm part German, but had tremendous amount of respect for authority. And my dad represented authority. And so I respected him greatly. Conversely, I don't necessarily believe that he had a huge amount of respect for me, because I was never fulfilling those expectations. And my dad died in 1991, and I'm not sure that I would have ever fulfilled his expectations, even if he were alive today. But nevertheless, I loved him and I respected him. Well, interestingly enough, the dynamic with my mother was, I think I took her for granted. She was always there. She was always going to do my wash on Saturday morning. And so this unconditional love was taken for granted. And I think maybe, even though I did not despise her, I loved her and I respected her, I think that there was not a great deal of appreciation. I think in the rearview mirror, I should have showed more appreciation for her and verbalized it more fully of how much I appreciated her as a mom, because she was a servant. She had a servant's heart, and she had satisfaction in serving others, especially and particularly her children. So my mom died in 2012. My dad died in 1991. My mom outlived my dad by about 20 years. And I think as far as regrets are concerned, I don't really have any regrets as it relates to my dad. I became the man I am. I got the Popeye thing going on. I is who I is. And maybe it would have never made him fully satisfied for the man that I am. But with my mom, she just loved Gary. And I wish, in retrospect, that I showed greater appreciation for her. Thank you today for all listeners to Liberty Observatory. This is Gary Matheny signing off. It is January 2025. Have a great day.